Greetings, Green and Healthy Movement. I am Kent Stoneking. I'm so happy to be with you. First of all, kudos to you for all the fine work you're doing in championing and promoting healthy and sustainable lifestyles. Of course, I would also like to thank the Kampung Senang Charity and Education Foundation for sponsoring this event. What an honor it is for me to be invited to participate with you. I am a person with quite an affiliation with diabetes, and diabetes is a global problem. By the way, happy World Diabetes Day. You're already celebrating in Singapore because it's late Saturday morning in Singapore. It happens to be 9 o'clock Friday evening in the Memphis, Tennessee area in the USA where I live. So you go ahead and start the World Diabetes Day party without me, and I'll join you in a few hours. But in the meantime, I have some things I would like to share with you about my journey with diabetes. I've had diabetes for a long time. I'm also a pharmacist who has worked extensively in the area of diabetes care here in the American Southeast, where diabetes is absolutely rampant. But I'm also a certified diabetes care and education specialist. And so I look at this diabetes topic from several angles, and I would really like to share with you some of the things that are happening in the world of diabetes and kind of where we came from and where we are today and where we're headed. So with that, let's get started. As far as my own personal timeline, I was diagnosed with diabetes in February of 1979. So don't worry about doing the math. That was 41 years ago. I am that old. I know that's hard to believe. In 1984, just 5 years into my diagnosis to the very month, I enrolled in a research study called the DCCT. I'll tell you quite a bit about the DCCT as we proceed, but very significant study launched in February of 94. I also received my first blood glucose meter in February of 1984. And you think, well, what's so big about that? Well, the fact is I had never tested my blood glucose prior to that. So my first blood glucose meter came when I joined the DCCT in 1984. A year later, I graduated from high school and I received my first insulin pump. Prior to that, I was on 4 injections of insulin per day, at least. So the pump was a huge step forward in my own diabetes progression. And I was under pretty good control as a research study participant with 4 shots a day. But the pump really took my care to the next level, that and the blood glucose monitoring that I was engaged in. 4 years later, May of '89, I graduated college. 4 years after that, I graduated from pharmacy school. I then joined a community-based diabetes care pharmacy practice. In fact, in the Memphis, Tennessee area, we had more patients with diabetes coming to our pharmacy than any other single pharmacy outlet in the entire state of Tennessee. And again, the southeast part of the United States is rampant with diabetes. And so we had quite a following of diabetes patients that we were treating. 1993 was also the year that the DCCT ended. It's a good thing that I got my first job because I had insurance through my employer to cover my diabetes testing supplies. They were no longer free like they were when I was in the DCCT. November of that year, I got married, and the DCCT findings were published in the New England Journal of Medicine, top tier journal for all things medical. There's my bride, Amanda. November 6th of this year, we celebrated our 27th anniversary. So there's proof positive that I'm telling the truth. 27 years and still going strong. It's just wonderful. So DCCT, why was this study so important? It was the first major type 1 diabetes trial that was ever conducted at this level. It was funded by the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases here in the United States. And really it answered 2 primary questions. The first was this: can we take patients who have type 1 diabetes and control their blood glucose to the level of people who do not have diabetes? Can we do that safely, or do we run them into too much danger with having low blood glucose episodes? The second question was, if we can do this successfully, control blood glucose at a non-diabetic level, what would the impact of that be in terms of the long-term complications of diabetes? And they are many. If you know anything about diabetes, people with diabetes are very likely to develop diabetic eye disease that could lead to blindness. They're likely to develop diabetic kidney disease that leads to dialysis and sometimes kidney failure requiring transplantation. People with diabetes are very much at risk for non-traumatic limb amputation because of diabetic nerve disease. And then diabetic heart disease is also a big issue. So a number of things to try and prevent, hopefully, with better control of blood glucose. So here are the answers. The DCCT specifically looked at eye disease, nerve disease, and kidney disease. And having established that blood glucose for a person with type 1 diabetes can safely be managed at the level of someone without diabetes, they found that dropping A1C levels, let me pause for just a moment and explain. A1C is average blood glucose over about a 90-day period. And I like the A1C because over in Singapore and in many parts of the world, you measure your daily blood glucose in millimoles per liter. Over here, we use milligrams per deciliter. So I have to do the factor of 18 conversion going from one to the other, but we all speak in A1C. And the DCCT was the very first study to establish that an A1C of less than 7% is ideal for controlling blood glucose. Pardon me. They also found that reducing A1C by up to 2 percentage points can reduce the likelihood of diabetic eye disease by 76%, reduce the likelihood of diabetic nerve disease by 60%, and reduce the likelihood of diabetic kidney disease by 50%. And even for people who had initial onset of those type of complications, the progression of those complications basically flatlined. So very significant findings in the DCCT. When the DCCT ended in 1993, the NIDDK decided to launch a second offshoot study from the DCCT called the EDIC trial. They used DCCT participants, like myself, pardon me, so sorry. Thank you. They wanted to look specifically at the long-term effect on DCCT level treatment on kidney and heart health. The EDIC actually is still ongoing after 27 years, but they've already published the very first statistically significant finding that said better control of blood glucose prevents diabetic heart disease. So very honored to be part of this type of diabetic research at this level. So this kind of transitions from the part one of my diabetes journey to part two, from the DCCT to EDIC. So 1994, EDIC launched. That was the year my wife and I bought our first home. 3 years later, I became a certified diabetes educator. My A1C was 5.8%. Again, less than 7% is ideal. So I was doing a good job taking care of my blood sugar. And our first child was born. There he is. Bradley's giving you a baby fist bump. 1997. Fast forward 3 years, our second child was born. My A1C was still under excellent control at 5.3%. And thankfully, the lights didn't go out at New Year's. You might remember Y2K if you're old enough. That was a big deal. My wife did not want to have a baby in 1999 for fear that the lights might go out. So we waited until 2000 and had our second child. And there's Caleb. Lots of fun, double the fun. The following year, my daughter was born, Hannah, and I call her my sweet girl. And indeed she is, because you can see what happened to my A1C. In that 1 year, I went from 5.3 to 6.9%. So she is my sweet girl. We were all excited to welcome her into our home, except maybe Caleb. He wasn't so sure. So continuing on, part two of my diabetes journey. Fast forward to the year 2013. I joined a company called ALRT as Director of Clinical Program Development. And I'm actually speaking to you on behalf of ALRT today. 2020, 41 years of type 1 diabetes. And folks, listen, I have no diabetes complications. I'm 53 years old. I still have 20/20 vision. Thank the Lord. Kidneys work, nerves work, heart is healthy. I run, I stay very active and healthy. And I learned how to take care of myself during the DCCT. So very significant findings in that study, and the impact that it had in my own life is immeasurable. Now, a little bit more about the A1C. I mentioned a moment ago that it's the average of blood glucose over about a 90-day period. Truly, this has become the gold standard for quality diabetes management. Less than 7% is optimal for most patients. Elderly patients, patients that have some kidney disease already, maybe we go a little bit higher just to protect them. But for most of us, less than 7% is ideal. We've also found that lowering A1C by just 1 percentage point reduces the complication risk for diabetes complications by about 40%. So every bit of improved diabetes control makes a tremendous difference in terms of complication risk and overall health. And then healthcare providers at least here in the United States, are incentivized by the insurance companies that pay them to care for patients with diabetes. They're incentivized for having those patients at a target A1C. And quite often, if the patient's A1C exceeds 9%, that's very poor control. The healthcare providers are penalized. So they earn bonuses for good control. They're actually penalized for poor control. So A1C matters to a number of stakeholders in the diabetes equation. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, I look at diabetes through a number of lenses. I'm a pharmacist focused on diabetes. I'm a certified diabetes care and education specialist, but I'm also a patient. And so let me speak, and we may have many people on the call today who also have diabetes. In fact, I would venture to guess that if you're on the call, you either have diabetes or you know someone who does. Diabetes is just that prevalent throughout the entire world. So let's talk for just a moment about the patient experience with diabetes. We have all kinds of tools in our toolbox. We have blood glucose meters, continuous glucose meters or CGMs, insulin pumps, all kinds of things. So a little bit of a timeline on the blood glucose monitoring frontier. The very first blood glucose monitor was launched by the Ames company. It was called the reflectance meter back in 1970. If you're old enough to remember transistor radios, like me, this resembles a transistor radio. Now, the blood glucose monitoring industry has its own trajectory that is a fascinating study, but that's outside the scope of our conversation here today. So just know that the very first blood glucose monitor became available in 1970, and technology began immediately working on ways to improve on blood glucose monitoring technology. But someone around 1999, just before the turn of the century, got a bright idea. They said, why don't we come up with a device that can monitor glucose, not just in snapshot fashion, every time I stick my finger, I get a number, but in a continuous fashion. So the era of continuous glucose monitoring, or CGM, was born in 1999 with the GlucoWatch biographer. And the device resembled a wristwatch, only about 3 times the size of my wristwatch. And it had some sensors that would attach to the skin and would detect glucose fluctuations through those sensors. Fascinating technology. Unfortunately, the sales didn't quite meet their expectations, and so this product is no longer available. In 2004, the Medtronic company, the world leader in insulin pump manufacturing and technology, came out with the very first Guardian RT CGM. This was involved a transmitter and a sensor that would feed the data wirelessly to a reading device. 2006, the very first Dexcom was launched. That's a household term nowadays as far as continuous glucose monitoring. The Dexcom is one of the world leaders. In 2008, Abbott launched their first product, the Freestyle Navigator CGM. Then a few years after that, we shifted really from a focus around blood glucose monitoring more toward diabetes management. And that was a good shift because we have all these technological ways of gathering numbers, looking at data. What in the world are we doing with the data to drive better care? So, like I said, just kind of turned a bit of a corner and started looking at that question. In 2010, the Medtronic company launched the first integrated insulin pump and CGM. This is called the Paradigm Rebel. In 2017, the Abbott company launched the Freestyle Libre monitor. And again, this monitor is taking the world by storm. Freestyle Libre is a top seller all over the world. Also in 2017, Medtronic launched their first closed-loop system, continuous glucose, and then based on the glucose trends, the pump will either ramp up the insulin if glucose is running high, or it will titrate down if the glucose is running lower. So fascinating technology. The following year, 2018, the first implantable CGM came out, the Eversense by a company called Senseonics. Patients would go and have a device implanted into the back of their upper arm. It would have a 90-day battery, and during that time, they didn't have to do anything but wear the watch or carry the device. They would know what their blood glucose was. No finger sticks. However, at the end of 90 days, they'd have to go back to the doctor and have the old one extracted and a new one put in. A great idea, but they didn't make it either. This product is no longer on the market. Now, I'm going to give you a teaser alert. 2021, the ALRT company will have the ALRT CGM diabetes solution. I'll talk more about the current ALRT diabetes solution in a few moments, but just so that you will be looking for this, toward the end of 2021, we will have the ALRT CGM diabetes solution, more comprehensive than anything that's currently on the market, anything that the industry has seen to date. Okay, so we're talking from a patient's perspective. We have all these meters and devices and pumps and all these things. Let's talk just about the blood glucose testing for a moment. You know, sticking fingers hurts. I've been at this for 41 years. It still hurts. It always hurts. Is there an alternative? Well, I'd sure like to find one. If I had to get a blood glucose meter, which one do I get? Which one is the best? Does my insurance cover it? In many places, in fact, I believe this is the case in Singapore, insurance doesn't cover blood glucose monitoring equipment at all. So it's entirely covered out of pocket. If insurance does cover it, the copays may be out of reach. We see that quite a bit here in the United States. So people are left to wonder, which one is best? Which one should I get? Which one can I afford? Is the affordable meter a quality meter? You know, lots of questions. And then if I do the testing, like my doctor says, twice a day, 3 times a day, for myself, you know, 4 or 5 times a day, does my doctor even care about my numbers? And many times patients feel like the doctor doesn't care about their numbers because they'll bring their numbers with them, either in a written format or electronic format, to their doctor's office visit. And the doctor simply sets it aside and says, okay, thank you very much. Now, please roll up your sleeve. I'm going to draw some blood and check your A1C. So it's really a bit of a conundrum for patients who don't understand why the doctor would have them test their blood sugar if they're not even going to use the numbers. I talked a moment ago about the quality of monitors, and I just wanted to share this with you briefly. These are data from the Diabetes Technology Surveillance Group, and this was published in 2018. They looked at almost 30 different blood glucose meters. I've listed the top 5 for you here. What I really want you to see are the right-hand column and the left-hand column. The right-hand column basically just shows you the ranking of accuracy based on the survey that they conducted. The left-hand column, when you look at brand, you'll notice right off the bat, Bayer, Roche, Abbott. These are global brands of blood glucose monitors. But then you have Arcray and Agamatrix. And the meters that were tested in this survey was the Relion Confirm Micro. That Relion is the Walmart brand here in the United States, or the CVS Advanced system by Agamatrix. Again, huge pharmacy chain here in the United States. These are store brands. They're very inexpensive compared to the name brands. My point being that we think we get what we pay for. Usually that's true. In the case of blood glucose monitors, unless you look at data like these, you don't really know, is my expensive meter better than the inexpensive meter that's on the shelf next to it? Look at the data, do your own research, we're in the information age, and find out which meter is truly best and which one will meet your needs. Now, I've been talking about continuous glucose monitoring. So the blood glucose meter concept has served us very well for a long time. With blood glucose data, we can extrapolate an A1C. A1C is still very helpful. We've discussed how A1C levels help us determine who is at greater risk or lesser risk for developing diabetes complications. And that's very important and will continue to be for a long time. However, with continuous glucose monitoring technology, where we can know 24/7 what's happening, not just with glucose data points, but with glucose trends, we're looking more now at time in range. And you can see on the right-hand side, for my friends in Singapore, this is rendered in millimoles per liter, okay? The blood sugar on the left and then the recommended time in range on the right. Basically, the 3.0 to 10.0 range, 10.0 millimole per liter range is the optimal range. And basically what they've determined as they've looked at this concept is if blood glucose can remain in that 3 millimole per liter to 10 millimole per liter range for at least 70% of the time, the A1C will take care of itself. What's the benefit? Well, if you look at the graph on the left, this person has 205, 56, and I know I'm speaking in milligram per deciliter, but high blood sugar, low blood sugar, everywhere in between, and their A1C is still fine. What the time in range does is it tightens up the fluctuation and prevents those extreme highs and extreme lows, because those carry their own risks for people's health. So time in range is becoming more and more important. You'll see more of that as continuous glucose monitoring becomes more widespread. Let's talk for just a moment about continuous glucose monitoring. How does this technology even work? Basically, there's a sensor that sits on the surface of the skin. So this is a cross section of skin, basically, and there's a little filament that penetrates the skin from the sensor. The sensor has an adhesive backing that keeps it tightly connected to the skin. You may be a bit skeptical. Kat put on a terrific workout display for us at the outset of our program, and she mentioned getting a little sweaty. What if you're athletic? What if you sweat a lot? What if you're a swimmer? What if you have a child who plays sports? Great questions. There are overlays for these sensors as well that help to hold the sensors in place. And there are very athletic people, very active people that wear these on a regular basis and do just fine. But it's just under the skin. It's about the thickness of a hair and very short. And you'll notice that it doesn't get down to blood flow. So you may be asking, all right, how does a device monitor blood glucose levels if it's not in touch with blood flow? And the little blue dots kind of give you a graphic representation of why they can do that, because there's glucose not just in the blood vessels, but in the tissue surrounding the blood vessels. We call that the interstitial fluid. So in that area, that fluid area around blood vessels, there's still glucose. And the level of glucose in the interstitial fluid reflects the level of glucose in the bloodstream. And so as blood glucose elevates and drops, interstitial glucose elevates and drops, and devices such as the CGM can detect those fluctuations and then render that data back to a reading device. How do they do that? There's a device called a transmitter. All of this is wireless, and this little transmitter, the Dexcom transmitter is in the top right, the Medtronic transmitter, the Guardian is in the lower left. These are very small. They're not rendered to scale on my screen. I've actually blown them up. They're less than half the size of what you see on the screen. Very comfortable to wear, very unintrusive. Again, you can be very athletic like myself and not have a problem wearing these. I'm wearing the Medtronic as we speak. But this sensor the transmitter takes the data from the sensor and wirelessly transmits it to a reader device, or it might even transmit it. In the case of Dexcom, there is a cell phone app that can be utilized as the reader. So here's how that would look. And again, just going with the Dexcom example, this is how the Dexcom looks on a cell phone. Functioning as the reader device, the app allows the user to see their glucose trends. Again, not just data points, but trends in real time. And then as those trends start moving in a dangerously high or dangerously low direction, and it actually gauges by rate. So as that rate is trending upward, even with a good number like 112 milligram per deciliter, that may be somewhere, doing the math in my head, that's dangerous, perhaps 4 or 5 millimole per liter, a good blood glucose. But with a good blood glucose, if the trend starts moving up or down rapidly, the user needs to know, because the user, if they know, can then take appropriate action to avoid a high blood glucose by taking more insulin. If they have a pump, they just hit a few buttons and get a dose, or avoid a low blood glucose by eating a snack. The point is knowing in advance what's happening, seeing the trend, and then addressing that trend to maintain time in range. Again, time in range is really the goal with continuous glucose monitoring. Blood glucose data sets then from these monitoring devices are not only available on the patient's own devices, but they can be shared. Think of the implications of this technology with parents who send their children to school wearing a continuous glucose monitoring device. The parent can track the child's glucose throughout the day. If there's a nurse at the school, they can be tracking it. The physician can be tracking it. So, quite a bit of opportunity for these data to be shared across devices in real time and get the team around the care of the person who needs it. Accountability, decision support, all these beautiful things happening with this technology. And I recognize that many of these devices are not available currently in Singapore. I would expect the high level of healthcare quality that Singapore offers, that these devices will be available soon if some of them are not already. But this is what's available, and it's tremendous in many ways. However, people look at these devices just like the blood glucose devices, and they go, okay, I love the fact that I don't have to stick my finger. The Dexcom, for instance, you put a sensor on your skin and you don't have to stick your finger. You wear it for 10 days, pull it off, put another one on, no finger sticks. The Freestyle Libre, 14 days, no finger sticks. The only stick you experience is putting a new sensor in. And there's a spring-loaded device that does that. It's in the skin. You don't even feel it, literally. I've worn them. They're very comfortable. So you might be saying, as a patient, again, we're looking at this through the patient lens, I love the fact I don't have to stick my finger. Wow, I get a lot of data using this technology. But, I'm a patient. I'm not a trained diabetes care expert. So what do all these data points really mean? How do I get my arms around all of this and really understand it in a way that will benefit me? Then you look at the price tag and you go, oh my goodness, these are expensive. We'll talk more about pricing in a little bit. So if you have insurance that would cover these devices, you might ask, does my insurance even cover such a device? If so, how much do I have to pay out of pocket? I don't have type 1 diabetes like Kent Stoneking. I have type 2 diabetes and I don't use insulin. Is this technology available for me? Some insurances will only cover them for type 1 patients, or if a type 2 patient uses insulin, they might cover it, but otherwise they might not. And then what are my options? What's available to me where I live, in my market, through my insurance, et cetera? So very compelling questions. And frankly, there's just enough technology out there and different features and all to be somewhat confusing. So it's well worth it to do the research. And then insulin pumps. I alluded to insulin pumps a few moments ago. Patients might ask this, if they're on insulin shots, I'm taking one shot at bedtime that my doctor says takes care of my non-mealtime insulin needs, kind of lays an insulin foundation, but then I have another pen and I'm taking a shot every meal. Frankly, I'm tired of all these shots. Would a pump be a good option for me? And then again, looking at the price tag, the initial cost of an insulin pump, it could be anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000, if there's no insurance involved. Hopefully insurance would defray some of that. But even the ongoing supply cost, from the sets that deliver the insulin to the reservoirs that contain the insulin inside the pump, ancillary supplies could run into the hundreds of dollars per month. So this is an expensive technology. It's a great technology. It delivers insulin. In fact, the one I mentioned a few moments ago, the Medtronic, that titrates its infusion of insulin based on blood glucose values, the Food and Drug Administration here in the United States gave this device the title of artificial pancreas. Basically, that's the only device that they've said that about, because it essentially functions like a pancreas. It gives you more insulin when you need it, less insulin when you don't. So it's tremendous as far as delivering insulin as closely to what the body would do without diabetes as anything that we know of. However, it's very, very expensive. And there are several options. There are insulin pumps like I described, Omnipod. I didn't show a picture of Omnipod, but basically think of the sensor diagram that I showed you, only with an insulin pump. It's a little device, a little bit larger than the sensor, but it contains insulin, and it's attached to the skin. Again, kids love this, athletic kids especially. They program it using a remote device. So lots of options. Insulin pumping, I will tell you this, from an educator standpoint, for someone who's new to insulin, I wouldn't recommend that they even think about a pump unless and until they've demonstrated at least 6 months of very disciplined self-care with their blood glucose testing and their injections before they go with a pump. There's just enough nuances to pump technology that a patient who doesn't really show knowledge or discipline using shots and blood glucose testing stands more of a likelihood of harming themselves really than helping themselves. So just that word of caution. So we've looked at this from a patient's perspective. And again, I'm happy to entertain questions. If you want to put questions in the chat box on Facebook Live. We will address those at the conclusion. But let's look at this for just a moment from the doctor's perspective. And this is helpful because doctors are the ones who make decisions about what patients get in most cases. What's currently happening, especially in primary care? Endocrinologists, the diabetes specialists, do a wonderful job. And I have all the respect in the world for diabetes specialists. However, 99.9% of diabetes care on a day-to-day basis is rendered by primary care physicians. So what's happening in the primary care space right now? Doctors are in the position of having to navigate what I call a diabetes technology tsunami. There's just so much coming at them so rapidly, not just with diabetes technology, but diabetes drugs. I'll put my pharmacist hat on for just a moment and talk about just the various, not just individual drugs, but drug classes that have emerged in the last 5 to 7 years. And primary care doctors, you have to understand, they treat everything that walks in the door, including diabetes. Okay, and so keeping up with everything that they deal with in a day's time, it's virtually impossible for them to keep up with all of the information coming out just in the diabetes world as hard and fast as it comes. And so, you know, when a patient comes in, we talked about the patient that comes in with their logbook or their electronic record of all of their data from checking their blood glucose, they give it to the doctor, and the doctor says, you know what, that's too much data. You've brought me a haystack, okay? I don't have the time nor the resources to look through that haystack. And my staff doesn't have the time or the resources to go in there and identify and extract and act upon any clinically relevant needles in that haystack. It's just too much. I don't have time to review all of that. That's why they say, you know, let me just check your A1C and be done with it. So, you know, they are just overwhelmed by all the data. Very elegant packages that the data comes in, but it's still very overwhelming to the doctor. They're constantly asking, you know, is doing something different really going to improve my patient's condition, or should I just maintain the status quo? Is it going to help my patients adhere to the other elements of their care plan that I've already put in place, medications, for instance, or insulin injections? If I do decide to prescribe a new blood glucose meter or a CGM device or an insulin pump, which one is the best? They're having to make those decisions as well. So they have to do the research just like the patients do. In fact, anything medical, please understand, you're always, as the patient, you're always your own best advocate. So if there's something that you want your doctor to do, you need to be your own advocate. Make a good case for it. Do the research, find what's best for you, in your opinion, and bring it to your doctor and say, would you please consider prescribing this for me? And here's how I think it'll benefit me. That's much better than just counting on the doctor to know, because it's just, again, it's very difficult for them to keep their arms around all of that, and it changes so rapidly. And then they'll ask the question too, can my patients afford these devices? Do they have insurance coverage and so forth? It's the same discussion that they have about prescribing the latest and greatest medications. There are some fantastic diabetes medications on the market, but several of them cost hundreds of dollars per year. And if the patients don't have resources to cover them, then writing a prescription is a waste of the doctor's time, and the patient doesn't get anywhere. So these are the kinds of things that the doctor is constantly having to think about in their day-to-day practice. So let's just go ahead and put it out on the table. The most dedicated primary care doctor still provides substandard diabetes care. And if they were honest, they would admit that. If we have any physicians on the call today, please forgive me. I do not mean to insult you in any way whatsoever. It is what it is, right? The most loving thing we can do is identify the truth. And here's the reason why. Doctors are so diligent. They're doing the very best they can, but they're only seeing their patients with diabetes once, perhaps twice a year on average. Unless that patient has had some difficulty, they need to come back more often. Once or twice a year is average. So in between time, they have no visibility whatsoever into what is happening with that patient's glucose trends. And then when they do come to the office, that's when they're testing their A1C. Okay, but in between time, again, they're providing care in a vacuum. So if I see my patient twice a year, I have two opportunities to see how they're doing, to change their therapy, and then they're out the door. What do the guidelines say? The guidelines say that if a patient's blood glucose average, their A1C, is not at goal, then the physician needs to reevaluate that therapy every 90 days, at least every 90 days, 90 days at the most. And after reevaluating, they need to make some adjustments because there's a reason that patient's not hitting their target A1C. So the doctor should reevaluate and adjust therapy every 90 days. If I don't see my patient, but once every 6 months or 12 months, then I've missed that opportunity and I have no idea what's happening in the interim when they're not in my office. And then even when patients' A1Cs come back elevated, again, there's such a tsunami of new information and new drugs. What do I do? What do the guidelines say? How do I advance their therapy in a way that meets the guidelines? Most doctors don't know. They can't keep up with it all. Again, so many different drugs, so many different ways of treating diabetes. What is it that I need to do next in order to help my patient get to goal and maintain that goal? So this is where ALRT has come in and helped to answer some of those questions. And I'd like to share that with you in just a moment. But if you doubt what I'm saying, or if you're a physician and you know, I've hurt your feelings a bit, I humbly apologize. However, I'd like to share with you some data from 2018. This study came out of Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic is the second best health system that we know of. They're ranked number 2 in the world behind Mayo Clinic. Singapore General Hospital is right there with them. So we look for good data to come from them. They're partnering with us at ALRT in a pilot. In fact, we're very excited about that. But Cleveland Clinic told on themselves. They did a survey of their primary care doctors. Second best health system in this area. And yet their doctors did not advance therapy in a timely manner for patients who had A1Cs of over 7%. Patients who were in the 7 to 7.9%, almost 3 out of 4 patients didn't have their therapy advanced in a year. Not 3 months like the guidelines say, in a year. Over half the patients that had A1Cs in the 8 to 8.9% range. No therapy advancement in a year. No change. Whatever they were on before, they remained on for that entire 12 months, even with that elevated A1C. And almost half the patients, 44.4%, that had A1Cs of greater than 9%. You remember the graph that showed the curvilinear relationship between A1C elevation and the likelihood of complications? These people are very likely candidates for complications, and yet almost half of them didn't have their therapy advanced in a year. All right. So diabetes complications are avoidable, but in order for them to be avoided, that A1C has to stay on target. And for the A1C to stay on target, the doctor who does the prescribing, the doctor who guides the therapy, has to be aware of what's happening with those glucose trends in between office visits. So how are they going to do that? This is where I'd like to share with you what ALRT has been involved in, and we're very excited about this. You know, sometimes the best answer is also the simplest answer. So what we've done is we've gone back to baseline. What are most people with diabetes throughout the world doing today? Most of them have a meter and they're doing finger sticks. And that's been the standard, again, since blood glucose monitoring first came about in 1970. We have excellent meters now. They're highly accurate, easy to use. So most patients with diabetes are testing with the finger stick method. So ALRT said, let's take the data that those machines render, and let's see if we can drive better outcomes using blood glucose testing data. Here's how it works. The ALRT diabetes solution uses a high quality, highly rated blood glucose meter. It's one of those that falls in that category of high quality, low cost. But this meter is right up there with the very best meters in the world. Patients test their blood glucose as their physicians have instructed them to do, once a day, several times a day, whatever it might be. The data is stored in the memory of the meter, and then the patient uses a free app on their device. Everyone has a device of some kind, right? Free app. Once a week, they connect the Bluetooth meter to the app on their device and upload their data set. When that data set is uploaded, it goes to the ALRT cloud. ALRT then takes that data and processes it with an AI algorithm, which renders from the data set. Again, the data set is blood glucose values. So many millimole per liter morning, so many millimole per liter noon, so many millimole per liter evening, so many millimole per liter night for 7 days. We ask patients to upload once a week. So you take a once a week data set, and ALRT will take that data and render a predictive A1C. Now, how do they do that? I don't want to bore you with the details. There are 7 equations, very, very high level mathematical equations in the medical literature. We've taken all 7 of those and built them into our algorithm to create a best fit model. The diagram that you see on the screen is not made up. These are actual data from an actual patient using our system. The red line and the red dots show the actual A1C tests that were performed by the doctor. Then the blue line illustrates the predictive A1C trend that the ALRT diabetes solution rendered. And as you can see, throughout the months of A1C, this actually is a 12-month period. With each ensuing A1C test, they were done every 3 months, according to guidelines, that the line fit tighter and tighter until it was virtually a perfect match. So what's the beauty of that? Here it is. When A1C is out of range for a specified period of time, the ALRT system will notify the physician. Again, the physician doesn't need a haystack. They don't need all this data coming in. They've told us this. We don't want to be bothered by a lot of data. I get it. That's fine. That's appropriate. You have a lot of things to do in a day's time. However, the guidelines say that when blood glucose is off the mark, when A1C is above goal for 90 days, the physician needs to be made aware and then needs to evaluate and adjust the therapy. Our system does that. Our system will notify the physician. The physician can log in and look at individual data points and data sets and uploads and all that. Most of them are not going to. They don't have time. Their nurses don't have time. They're seeing patients. They're keeping records. They're doing all the things that they do in a day's time. So the data are there if they wish to look at it. If they never look at it, they will only be notified if and when a patient has an A1C, predictive A1C, that moves off the mark. And the patient's at home. They're testing their blood glucose and doing their weekly upload. But the physician is notified if and when that A1C trend goes too high. Here's how it'll look on the physician screen. ALRT has built in an insulin dosing algorithm that is cleared by the Food and Drug Administration here in the US that actually helps physicians know how to adjust insulin doses. So in this example on the screen, we have a patient who's using 10 units of Levemir insulin at bedtime, and it wasn't getting the job done. They were probably also taking metformin or what have you, but their blood glucose wasn't being well controlled. So the algorithm came back, and in this example, we built in 2 US-based examples. We have the American Diabetes Association guidelines, and we have the American Association of Diabetes Educators guidelines. By the way, ALRT is an international company, so we have the platform with the Diabetes Singapore guidelines built in. So Singaporean physicians today could begin using this and have Diabetes Singapore guidelines to work off of as far as insulin dose suggestions. Now the physician has the opportunity to select whichever guideline they choose. They could select neither one. They could choose to do nothing. But in this example, this physician has chosen to advance the therapy to 11 units at bedtime per American Diabetes Association recommendations from their guidelines. They confirm that that's the dose. Then they can send that dose suggestion to the patient. Here's the thing. The patient never has to come into the office. All right. They're uploading their data. The physician is notified if and when the data suggests that their A1C is out of range for 90 days. Then and only then do they go in and they go, oh, okay, my patient needs an adjustment. Here's what's suggested. This is what I do. Patients get the right medication at the right dose at the right time to achieve and maintain good control. And not only do we do insulin, but we also do the panoply of non-insulin diabetes therapies in an algorithmic fashion as well that is in accordance with the guidelines. So we've had physicians tell us as we share this with them, that piece of our platform alone would be a huge selling feature. But we have the entire package. It's the entire diabetes solution. We're gathering blood glucose, rendering it to predictive A1C, notifying the physician if and when it needs to be addressed, and then the physician logs in and says, okay, what do I do? The system will tell them, based on guidelines, here's what we suggest: advancing doses of existing medications or initiating new medications. Then once the physician's made a determination of what to do, and they hit confirm, Margaret, our patient, is notified that Dr. Smith has made the decision to increase her dose of Levemir from 10 units at bedtime to 11. At this point, Margaret needs to click the link on her device to confirm that she has received that instruction and acknowledged it. Once she clicks that and confirms, the physician gets a notification on his computer screen that says, okay, Margaret has acknowledged that you wish for her to increase her dose. What would the physician expect at that point? Margaret will increase her dose. That very evening, she will take 11 units instead of 10. And the physician would also expect that on Margaret's next upload, that the impact of that change would be clearly demonstrated. And if it's not demonstrated, the physician can go up to 12 units or 13. The point is that the physician can titrate medication doses and add new medications in a method that adheres to the clinical practice guidelines without ever having to schedule a separate office visit. So much is being done remotely, especially now with COVID-19, right? Telehealth has never been hotter than it is right now, because we keep patients safer if they stay at home versus coming out in public and go to physicians' offices where sick people are, right? Physicians can do a great job providing care remotely using a tool like this. What about cost? I'm glad you asked. We've talked about the Dexcom CGM, terrific system, expensive system. I'll just use US dollars. The receiver, the device that actually shows the glucose levels, $380 US. That's a one-time purchase. But then the sensors, I mentioned they last 10 days. So a box of 3 sensors for a 30-day supply, $320 US dollars. That's cost prohibitive for most people. Freestyle Libre, very popular device. By the way, technically not a CGM, although they like to advertise that they are. It's a flash glucose meter. So if I've got the Libre patch back here, I take my device and wand it over, I'll get a reading. Now, the device is gathering my data in the background in the meantime. However, if I fail to wand my device for more than 8 hours, I lose my trend. And then it's just data points. So terrific device, very popular. The reading device costs $70. Again, that's a one-time purchase. But then the sensors, these sensors last 14 days. So a 2-pack is a month's supply, $80 per month. More affordable than Dexcom if you're paying out of pocket. But my question to you is, why would you spend that kind of money when all these systems give you is data? Data is great, but it only benefits a patient if it's used in the right way by the right people to advance good care. That's what sets ALRT apart. Not only do we leverage the data and funnel it back to the physician in a relevant manner, a predictive A1C, no one else does that. ALRT sends it to the physician as a predictive A1C. That's the one number the physician can use to act upon based on the trend and what's happening. We also provide, as I mentioned, the therapy advancement suggestions, whether it's insulin or non-insulin therapies, so the physician can do the right thing at the right time, even without the patient coming in. What about the cost? For a mere fraction of the cost of the Dexcom and the Freestyle, and even less than most of your blood glucose monitoring systems that are out there, ALRT offers this type of a platform. In fact, in Singapore, ALRT is working with some diabetes-trained nurses. On a weekly basis, ALRT users will have their data reviewed by a diabetes-trained nurse through partnership with Diabetes Singapore. And these nurses will be reviewing the data on a weekly basis and funneling that back to the physician on an as-needed basis at no additional charge. We're not just dealing with diabetes numbers, we're dealing with diabetes management. I would love to entertain any questions that you might have about the ALRT diabetes solution. Again, this is a blood glucose monitoring based solution that really takes care of every need of a person with diabetes in between physician's office visits to get them to the best level of control and keep them there. But stay tuned, because the latter part of next year, ALRT will be launching their CGM diabetes solution. So more to come on that. Thank you again for your time. I'm finished with what I have to share. What questions do you have? I'm tracking the box on Textbook Live. Green and Healthy submitted a comment that Singapore has no glucose monitoring subsidy. Yeah, I was aware that insurance, there's no kind of a coverage. So anyone who's using glucose monitoring would have to pay for that out of pocket. Again, this is the type of system for a mere fraction of the cost of the systems I described, and even less than what a blood glucose meter costs today. If you went out to a pharmacy or a retailer and you went to purchase a blood glucose meter and test strips, you would spend a certain amount of money. For probably less than what you would spend in your typical pharmacy, you can get the ALRT meter and test strips and the entire diabetes solution package. Now, I'm not at liberty to share specific dollars. Much of that is still being worked out with ALRT leadership and Diabetes Singapore and some other stakeholders in Singapore. So that will be available very soon. But I can say with confidence, it's a fraction of the cost. Whatever a patient might be able to spend on their diabetes care, this would be very much worth it. Do we have other questions? If so, please enter them on Facebook Live on the chat box, and I'll be happy to entertain them. While we're waiting, my kids are now 23, 20, and almost 19. So they've changed quite a bit since they look like they did in the photos I shared. But we still love them. They all still live at home. And we not only love each other, we like each other. We get along. So very blessed indeed. Blessed to have good diabetes health. Blessed to have been a part of the DCCT and still a part of EDIC. If there are diabetes research trials happening in your area, please consider signing up and being a study participant. You may be a part of a landmark study like I was. And I mean, the DCCT is where I learned how to take care of myself. And even though that trial ended in 1993, I still utilized the same level of diligence in my own diabetes care that I learned during the study. So it was a huge benefit. Sometimes people say, well, what are the risks of participating in clinical research? Full disclosure, the worst that can happen is nothing. Okay. You might be out a little bit of time and effort, but if you don't derive a benefit from participation, you at least, you don't incur risk. So very much encourage participation in clinical research. So there's a question from Joyce Lai. She asked, what's the latest version of the test kits and where can those be purchased? The test device that we're using currently is by Bionim. Bionim is a Taiwanese company, and again, a very high quality monitor. But ALRT is licensing the monitors from Bionim. So currently they're not available on the retail shelves. Again, the pricing and all of that is being worked out with Singaporean leadership and with Diabetes Singapore, really at the hub of those conversations. We've been blessed to have some tremendous partners in Singapore. And our chairman and CEO, Mr. Chan, lives in Singapore. So we've just had a tremendous opportunity to get to know the people who make diabetes care happen for the people of Singapore. So we want to make this launch the right way. We want to make sure everything is aligned and the products are available, the physicians are aware. Unlike many of the other systems that are out there on the retail shelves, those are for patients. And basically the message is, you patient, buy this, use this, and see if you can get your doctor on board. And again, the doctor's going, wait a minute, this is too much information. It's coming at me too fast. I can't even. So the patient has put out the expense, and they have something that they can use, but it doesn't really help their physician. With ALRT, it's physician focused. So the patient is testing their blood glucose, to getting their numbers. The patient gets to see their predictive A1C. After uploading every week using my cell phone, the ALRT app will tell me how many data points I uploaded, and within seconds, it'll say your predictive A1C is this figure. And it'll either congratulate me or it'll say, hey, you need to improve. But there's instant feedback. And so patients see their predictive A1Cs, doctors see the predictive A1Cs, but doctors are really the ones that will need to be in the business of prescribing this system for patients for whom it's appropriate. So Joyce, excellent question. And, I've thought as well that here in the United States, we should be able on retail shelves or perhaps through Amazon, to have some retail sales. But really, that's just not the best method for rolling out a system like this. And so the best takeaway for you, if you're interested, is begin now talking to your doctor about ALRT. In fact, I don't have it on the screen, but if you'd like to look at our website, alrt.com. Couldn't be simpler. alrt.com. You can learn about our system, begin talking about our system with your doctor, and very soon our system will be available in Singapore through physicians' offices, and we'll begin to see patients getting much better care in much shorter cycles, having therapies advance, hitting those target A1C levels, and leading healthier lives, having fewer diabetes complications. And really, that's what everyone wants, right? We want to live a long, sustainable, healthy life. That's what the Green and Healthy movement is all about. And so for people with diabetes, you can do this. You can do this. I've had diabetes for 41 years, on insulin the entire time, 0 complications. Again, very blessed, very thankful, but also very engaged in my care, using the right tools to keep my eye on what's happening. A system like ALRT is designed for the user who has little or no understanding of diabetes. If they understand enough to check their blood sugar, to upload once a week, the system will guide them and will guide their doctor in advancing their therapy and making sure that they hit their goal. Are there any other questions? Thank you again for allowing me to present. This is such a privilege. Again, happy World Diabetes Day. I'll be joining you once the clock strikes midnight here in Memphis, Tennessee in about 2 hours. And just wish you all the very best of life and the very best of health.